My name is David Matthews, and I'm recording this as a warning. If you ever find an old radio at an estate sale, if it has an unmarked frequency between 1,600 and 1,700, if it feels warm to the touch even when it's unplugged, destroy it. Don't listen to it. Don't try to understand it. Just destroy it and never look back. I didn't heed this warning because I never received it. Now it's too late for me, but maybe I can save someone else from what I've become, from what's hunting me. This started 3 weeks ago with what I thought was the deal of a lifetime. Now I know it was a trap that had been waiting decades for someone foolish enough to spring it. The Hartwell estate sale was supposed to be routine. I restore vintage electronics, and estate sales are where I find my best pieces. Margaret Hartwell had died at 89, alone in her Victorian house on Portland's east side. The radio was in the basement, hidden behind stacks of old magazines. A 1947 Zenith transoceanic in near-perfect condition. The asking price was $25. A steal for a radio worth thousands when restored. But as I carried it to my car, I noticed something wrong. Despite being stored in that damp basement, it was warm. Not sun-warmed. It was a cloudy day. Warm like it had been running for hours. "Strange choice," said a voice behind me. I turned to see an elderly man watching me from the porch. He was too well dressed to be working the estate sale, too old to be family. "Excuse me?" I asked. "That radio?" he said, pointing with a walking stick. "Margaret warned me someone would eventually buy it. Said it would call to the right person when it was ready." "Ready for what?" The old man smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "To complete its collection." Before I could ask what that meant, he walked away, disappearing around the corner of the house. When I asked the estate sale workers about him later, they insisted no elderly man had been there all day. That evening, I began the restoration process in my workshop. The radio's internal components were in impossible condition. No corrosion, no wear, as if it had been manufactured yesterday. But there was something unusual. An unmarked section on the frequency dial between 1600 and 1700, marked only with a spiral symbol. When I powered it on and tuned to that section, the static stopped completely. Total silence that made my ears ring. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. "Help me. Please, someone help me. I'm trapped in the basement, and he's coming back. He has the knife, and he's singing that song again." If anyone can hear this, my name is Rebecca Morrison, and I live at 1247 Oak Street. Please send help before he... The voice cut off with screaming, then silence. I frantically tried to retune the frequency, but it was gone, just normal static. I convinced myself it was interference from a cell phone or CB radio, but that night I couldn't sleep. The desperation in that woman's voice, the terror it felt too real. The next night, curiosity won over common sense. At exactly 11:47 p.m., I tuned to that frequency again. The same unnatural silence. Then a different voice. "This is Officer Danny Walsh, badge number 847. I'm in pursuit of a suspect in the Riverside murders, but something's wrong." He led me into the old Mackenzie warehouse. And now there are others here. They're wearing masks made of human skin, and they're surrounding me. My radio's dead. My backup isn't coming. If anyone hears this, tell my wife Sandra I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't come home tonight. The transmission ended with sounds that still give me nightmares. Horrible, wet noises, and laughter that didn't sound entirely human. I immediately called the Portland Police Department, asking about Officer Danny Walsh. They had no officer by that name. No badge number 847. No Riverside murders. But the radio protocols he'd used were perfect, and that voice, that terrified, desperate voice, was burned into my memory. I couldn't let it go. I spent the day researching, looking for any trace of Rebecca Morrison or Officer Walsh. Nothing. No missing persons reports, no unsolved cases, no records of either name in Portland or the surrounding areas. But that night, I was back at the radio at 11:47 p.m. A new voice, a child this time. My name is Tommy Chun, and I'm 7 years old. The bad man took me from the park and put me in a dark place with other kids. We've been here for days, and we're really hungry. He comes down and takes one of us upstairs every day, and they don't come back. I can hear them crying up there sometimes, but then it gets quiet. I think it's my turn tomorrow, and I'm scared. Mommy, if you can hear this, I love you, and I'm sorry I didn't listen when you told me not to talk to strangers. The child's voice broke into sobs, then cut off abruptly. I was violently sick. The innocence in that voice, the terror. I called the police about a possible kidnapping, but how could I explain that I'd heard it on a radio frequency that shouldn't exist, from a child whose name appeared in no missing persons database? The fourth night brought a woman's voice, someone calling herself Dr. Sarah Chun, possibly the mother of the child from the previous night. She described being trapped in a hospital during what sounded like a zombie outbreak, her voice clinical even in terror, as she detailed symptoms of patients who had died but continued moving and attacking staff. I was beginning to see a pattern. The voices always came at 11:47 p.m. They were always final transmissions, desperate calls for help from people facing death, and none of them existed in any official records I could find. But that morning, something happened that made me realize this wasn't just about mysterious radio transmissions. I was having coffee when I heard a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 30s with dark hair and frightened eyes. When I opened the door, she spoke in a voice that made my blood freeze. "Are you the one who's been listening to us?" It was Rebecca Morrison, the woman from the first transmission. She was standing on my porch, alive and real, but her clothes were torn and she had what looked like knife wounds on her arms. You're dead," I stammered. "I heard you die. Did you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or did you hear me dying? There's a difference, you know. I'm in between now, thanks to you. We all are. Every night you listen, you make us a little more real. You give us a bridge back to the world of the living." She reached out to touch my face, and her fingers were ice cold. "Keep listening, David. We need you to keep listening. Soon we'll all be real again, and then we can thank you properly." When I blinked, she was gone. But on my doorstep was a pool of blood that hadn't been there before. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I researched the previous owners of the radio. Margaret Hartwell had owned it for 70 years, since she was 19. Before that, it belonged to a man named Edmund Cross, who had died in 1954 under mysterious circumstances. Cross had been found in his house, sitting in front of the radio with his hand on the tuning dial. He'd been dead for a week, but neighbors reported hearing voices coming from his house every night during that time. The police report mentioned that his final diary entries spoke of voices from the other side and completing the collection. That evening, I noticed someone standing across the street from my house. A man in a police uniform, but when I looked more closely, his uniform was wrong. Outdated from maybe the 1960s or 70s. Even from a distance, I could see that his face was pale, almost gray. It was Officer Danny Walsh. I was certain of it. He stood there for 3 hours, just watching my house. When a car drove by, its headlights revealed that he cast no shadow on the ground behind him. At 11:47 p.m., I found myself at the radio again, compelled by something I couldn't resist. This time, the voice was that of an airplane pilot, describing a crash over the ocean. But I barely heard the words because I kept glancing at my windows, expecting to see faces peering in. The next morning, I found small bloody handprints on my kitchen window. Child-sized prints. That evening, as I walked to my car after work, I heard a young voice behind me. "Mister, can you help me find my mommy?" I turned to see a little boy, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes. He was wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days, and there were bruises on his arms. "Tommy?" I whispered. He nodded. "You heard me calling for help, but nobody came. The bad man got me anyway. But you listened, and now I'm here. Will you help me find my mommy now? Tommy, you need to go away. You need to rest." His expression changed, becoming something far too adult for a 7-year-old face. "I can't rest, mister. None of us can. Not until we're all real again. You have to keep listening. You have to hear all of our voices." I ran to my car and drove away, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, Tommy was sitting in my back seat. "It's okay, mister. We don't want to hurt you. We just want to be alive again. Keep listening to us, and soon we'll all be together." When I reached for the radio to turn it off, the child was gone. But the smell remained, the smell of death and decay that I was beginning to associate with these visitations. I tried staying at a hotel that night, but at 11:47 p.m., I found myself tuning in anyway. The radio had somehow appeared on the hotel room's desk, even though I was certain I'd left it at home. This time, the voice was a doctor describing a plague outbreak in her hospital. As she spoke, I could hear other voices in the background, patients moaning, staff members crying, and underneath it all, a sound like dozens of people whispering in unison. When the transmission ended, I realized the whispering was still there, but it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the hallway outside my hotel room. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Multiple voices, speaking in perfect synchronization, were moving through the hotel. They were calling my name, room by room, getting closer. "David Matthews? David Matthews. We know you're listening. We know you're here." I climbed out the window and spent the rest of the night in my car in a 24-hour diner parking lot. But even there, I could see figures standing at the edge of the light. Rebecca Morrison, Officer Walsh, little Tommy, and others I hadn't met yet, but somehow recognized from their voices. They didn't approach, just watched, waiting. The next day, I tried to tell my coworker Mark about what was happening. He listened patiently as I described the radio, the voices, the figures stalking me. When I finished, he was quiet for a long minute. "David," he said finally, "you haven't been to work in 3 days. I've been calling you, but your phone goes straight to voicemail. And this morning, I drove by your house. Your car's been in the driveway the whole time, but you haven't answered your door. I checked my phone. No missed calls from Mark. No missed calls from anyone. The date showed September 20th, but I was certain it was the 23rd. What day is it, Mark? Saturday, September 20th. Are you feeling okay? You look terrible. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. In the mirror, my reflection looked gaunt, as if I hadn't eaten in weeks. My eyes were bloodshot, and there were dark circles that made me look like I hadn't slept in days. But worse than my appearance was what I saw behind my reflection. Standing in the mirror's background were all of them: Rebecca, Officer Walsh, Tommy, Dr. Chon, and dozens of others whose voices I'd heard. They were smiling, but their smiles were too wide, too knowing. In the mirror, I watched Tommy mouth the words, "Almost ready." That night, I tried to destroy the radio. I grabbed a hammer and brought it down on the case as hard as I could. The hammer passed right through it as if the radio wasn't there. But I could still see it. I could still touch it when I wasn't trying to damage it. It was becoming more real, while everything else in my world was becoming less so. At 11:47 p.m., I found myself listening again, even though I'd sworn not to. This time, the voice was different. "Hello, David. This is Edmund Cross. I owned that radio before Margaret Hartwell, just like you own it now. I know what you're going through, because I went through it myself. The voices, the stalking, the feeling that reality is slipping away. It's because you're slipping away, David. Every night you listen, you become a little less real in your world and a little more real in ours. The radio doesn't just receive transmissions from the dead, it's a doorway. And you, by listening, are walking through it." My blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" "It's not what we want, David. It's what the radio wants. It collects voices, final transmissions from people facing death. But it needs someone alive to listen, to act as a bridge between the worlds. Margaret Hartwell listened for 70 years, creating hundreds of voices. When she died, it needed a new listener. How do I stop it?" Edmund laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "You don't. You listen until you join us. Then the radio will wait for the next collector, the next person foolish enough to think they found a bargain at an estate sale. The cycle continues forever." I spent the next day researching Edmund Cross and Margaret Hartwell. Cross had been found dead in 1954, but witness accounts described him talking to his radio for weeks before his death, having conversations with people who weren't there. Margaret Hartwell had lived as a recluse for 70 years, with neighbors reporting that they heard multiple voices coming from her house every night. Both had been collectors. Both had fed the radio with their attention, their belief, their gradual surrender to its call. That night, as 11:47 approached, I made a decision. Instead of listening passively, I picked up the microphone that I'd noticed attached to the radio, but never questioned. "This is David Matthews," I spoke into it. "If anyone can hear this, I need help. I'm trapped by something that feeds on the voices of the dying, and I don't know how to escape." The response came immediately, not from the radio speakers, but from the room around me. Every voice I'd heard over the past week spoke in unison. "Welcome to the collection, David." I woke up that morning to find my house full of strangers. Rebecca Morrison was cooking breakfast in my kitchen, her knife wounds still visible, but no longer bleeding. Officer Walsh sat at my dining room table, reading a newspaper that was blank except for the headline, "Local man joins the collection." Tommy was watching cartoons in my living room, but the TV was off. He was laughing at something only he could see, "Good morning, David," Rebecca said without turning around. "I hope you like eggs. I made them just the way you like them." "How do you know how I like my eggs?" "We know everything about you now. We've been watching you for weeks, learning from you, becoming more real by feeding on your belief in us. I tried to leave the house, but the door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. I was trapped with the voices, and they were no longer just voices. We're all here because of you," Officer Walsh said, looking up from his blank newspaper. "Every night you listened, you gave us more substance, more reality. Now we're strong enough to exist without the radio. What do you want from me?" Tommy giggled from the living room. "We want you to join us, silly. We want you to make your final transmission so the radio can find someone new to collect. They wouldn't let me eat. They wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I tried to rest, one of them would shake me awake, reminding me that I had a job to finish. The radio needs your voice," Dr. Chun explained. She had appeared sometime during the day, still wearing her blood-stained surgical scrubs. "It needs your final transmission to complete this collection cycle, but it will go dormant until the next collector finds it. What happens to you when the cycle ends?" "We fade," Rebecca said sadly. "We exist only as long as someone is listening. But that's okay. We'll come back when the next person starts tuning in. We're part of the radio now, part of its collection." "And what happens to me?" "You become the next voice," Tommy said, clapping his hands excitedly. "You get to be the one who warns the next collector, just like Mr. Cross warned you." I realized then that every voice I'd heard had once been like me. A collector who'd been drawn in by the radio, who'd listened night after night until they became part of its endless broadcast. At 11:47 p.m., they led me to the radio. My hands were shaking as I picked up the microphone, but I had no choice. The compulsion to speak was overwhelming, as if the words were being pulled from my throat. "This is David Matthews," I heard myself say. "I bought a radio at an estate sale, thinking I was getting a good deal, but the radio found me, not the other way around. It's been collecting voices for decades, maybe centuries. Voices of people facing death, people crying out for help that never comes. If you're hearing this, if you found the radio, you need to destroy it. Don't listen to the frequencies. Don't try to understand what you're hearing. Just destroy it before it traps you like it trapped me." The words came easier now, flowing like water. "But you won't destroy it, will you? You'll be curious. You'll want to hear more. You'll convince yourself it's just radio interference or old recordings. And every night you listen, you'll make us more real. You'll feed the collection with your attention, your belief, your gradual surrender to the call of the voices." I could feel myself getting weaker with every word, as if my life force was being drained into the transmission. I can see them now, all around me. Hundreds of people who've died alone and afraid, who've become part of the radio's eternal broadcast. They're not evil, they're just lost, trapped between life and death, looking for someone to hear their stories. But the radio is something else. It's hungry. It feeds on final moments, on the desperate calls for help that no one answers. My vision was starting to blur, and I could feel the other voices preparing to take my place in the collection. If someone finds this recording, if someone hears my voice calling out from that unmarked frequency, remember that I was real once. David Matthews, electronics restorer from Portland, Oregon. I had a life, had dreams, had people who cared about me. Don't let the radio make you forget that we were all real once. The transmission was ending. I could feel myself fading, becoming just another voice in the endless broadcast. The cycle is complete now. The radio will wait for its next collector, and I'll wait with it, ready to warn the next person who thinks they found a bargain at an estate sale. But they won't listen to the warning. They never do. The radio always gets what it wants in the end. The transmission ended, and I found myself floating in a space between spaces, surrounded by all the other voices. We were part of the radio now, part of its collection, waiting for the next person to tune in and bring us back to life. The radio sat silent on my workbench, looking innocent and antique, but I knew it wouldn't stay silent long. Somewhere out there, someone was browsing estate sales, looking for a good deal on vintage electronics. Someone who would see the beautiful 1947 Zenith transoceanic and think they'd struck gold. The cycle would begin again. It always did. The radio was patient, eternal, always hungry for new voices to add to its collection. And when that next person finally tuned to the unmarked frequency between 1600 and 1700, they would hear my voice first, trying to warn them, trying to save them from the trap that had claimed me. But they wouldn't listen. They never do. The radio always gets what it wants in the end. This is David Matthews. If you've found the radio, if you're listening to this frequency, you need to stop right now. Turn off the radio and walk away. Don't be curious about the voices you're hearing. Don't try to help us. We're already dead. We died alone and afraid, calling out for help that never came. The radio collected our final moments and trapped us here, in the space between life and death. But you're still alive. You still have a choice. Destroy the radio. Break it into pieces and scatter them. Don't let it find another collector, another person to feed on until they join our ranks. Please, if you have any compassion, any mercy, end this cycle. Set us free. Don't let the radio add your voice to its collection. Don't become like us. Don't.